All right, welcome everyone. This week is Parshas Vayishlach. It's a very, very significant parsha in the sense that, as was told, that whenever a representative of the Jewish people or leader of the Jewish people was asked to confront the Western world, the Christian world, known otherwise as Edom in our rabbinic literature, going back 1,000 years, that they first reviewed this week's parsha. And this advice was even given to Menachem Begin when he made his way to Camp David. As we know, didn't have the greatest result there, but it did. It is a guideline of how to deal with what we would call today the Western world. So there's a lot of lessons there. But first, I want to comment on the fall of Damascus. The fall of Damascus and its significance. What really is the significance, from our perspective, of the events of these last really several days, in which we see the sudden and dramatic collapse of the Syrian regime, which had lasted over a half a century and suddenly disintegrated. And let's understand that this Syrian regime has been embattled in a civil war since I think 2011, which represented the following conflict. The Syrian dictator, Bashir Assad, I think that was the name, he's an Alawite. He's a different kind of Muslim. He's a minority Muslim. Most Muslims are either Sunni or Shia. And if you want to know really in depth from our perspective, the real Yishmaelim that we speak about are Arabs, meaning Islamic Arabs who follow Islam. There's many, many billions of people who follow Islam today, but not all of them, in other words, are Arab. There's very few countries that have the identity as Arab, which would qualify them in our understanding as the contemporary B'nai Ishmael. And it even has a halachic application because, as we paskin, if you want to look and say for chinuch, you can verify this, that the children of Keturah, who is Hagar, if they can be identified as ethnically, biologically pure, Zotomeret, they can trace their roots to Hagar and as the wife of Avram Avinu, are obligated to do bris milah on the 8th day of their life. And the halacha is, since that the Yishmaelim, the general Arab population, absorbed what we would call the B'nai Keturah, the Arab, let's say even Islamic, if you want to call them that, but biblically, hereditarily connected to Avram and Hagar. And since they're all mixed up today, the psak halacha is within Shulchan Aruch that all Arabs, all B'nai Yishmael, I call it from the Arab hybrid ethnicity, the Arab ethnicity. What does that mean? Egypt, Syria. Syria, when it was founded after World War II, was known as the Syrian Arab Republic. I think it still may be, I think they want to call it that now again. But there's Arabs. Jordan, Arab. Saudi Arabia, Arab. Some of the, the Arabian Peninsula, Arab. As opposed to when you go further north and you meet Turks and Uzbekis and Persians and all Circassians and all sorts of other ethnicities that are not Arabs. In fact, I saw that the Saudis, who are pure Arab, and usually the pure Arabs, are Sunnis. That's a sect of Islam, which is much, much more monotheistic than Shiitism is, which is what Iran is, which is what Hezbollah is, both of them. That they are akin to a hybrid between a little bit of Avodah Zarah and Islam. What do I mean by that? The Sunnis will not allow any representation, any idol, any shrine at all, because their monotheism is pure. And in that sense, they're far closer, only in that sense, they're far closer to Yahadus than the Shiites are, who believe in all sorts of shrines and is quote unquote saints of some kind. And if you remember, several years ago, when ISIS, Yimach Shemam, who are Sunnis, overran Iraq, etc., they were destroying Shia shrines as they went along, because these people are Sunnis. They don't tolerate any forms, idols, statues, because this smacks of more of Christianity and idolatry. So right now, it is the more ideologically closer to us Sunnis, although our mortal enemies, as Yishmael is always our mortal enemies, I explained in previous weeks, because of their contest against us for dominance in Eretz Yisrael. But once they give up that quest for dominance, then there can be peace. And it seems what's happening now is an extraordinary thing, that these Sunnis have allied themselves against the Alawite Bashar Assads, which is a minority, and the Shiite minority, which is backed by Hezbollah, which is Shiite, and Iran, which is Shiite. So this is the battle that has gone on for Syria in the last, just really, since the quote-unquote ceasefire agreement. What's happened is that the Sunnis have come back, and they've taken Syria, and especially Damascus, what we call Damascus, from the hands of the Shiite, which is essentially Iran and Hezbollah. Why do I bring this to your attention, other than to bring you history? Because of its significance from a Torah perspective. What this really means is, in theory, that the real Arabs have retaken Syria. It is now truly a Syrian Arab Republic, as opposed to a Syrian half Iranian, half other mixtures, which fall under the Shiite umbrella. So that is significant if the following will take place, and that is, if that population will make peace with Israel by accepting the fact that Israel has dominion over the land of Israel, and they do not seek to conquer Eretz Yisrael from us, then what we have in place is a potential peace agreement, which could, by the way, last. And not only that, it will mirror what has happened with Egypt and Jordan, and soon Saudi Arabia and the other countries, the Emirates, who will say Israel can be Israel. Put the Palestinian question aside. That's the only problem. But as long as we let Israel be Israel, then there is peace, and there is more than peace. I saw somebody shared a clip with me just this morning. If you scramble the letters of Damasek, what Hebrew word would you get? Mikdash. And some Sfarim have claimed that when Damasek falls, into, how shall I say, non-opposition to Israel, which, for the most part, it wasn't. I mean, they didn't try to conquer Israel since 1973. That was a true attempt to conquer all of Eretz Yisrael, but that was by the same dynasty that was in charge until a day or two ago. The Assad regime did try to conquer Israel, had Israel as its main opposition, and formed a mortal threat. I mean, the stories of the 1973 Yom Kippur War are harrowing, how miraculously a handful of tanks managed to stand up against Syrian forces. And of course, there's the famous story about Eli Cohen, the legendary Israeli spy who posed as an Arab businessman, infiltrated and became, I think, was offered the job as Secretary of Defense of Syria right before the 6 Day War, and he came up with the brilliant idea that he told them, plant eucalyptus trees. I think they're eucalyptus trees. Plant trees everywhere where you want to position troops, so it'll be nice and shady for them. Why should they roast in the sun? And Israel had that intelligence, and therefore, during the 67 war, they were able to bomb every location where the soldiers were gathered, because Eli Cohen had revealed to them that if you look for a tree, that's where they are. And I think that even carried over to 1973, if I have my facts correct, that it still wasn't discovered, and Israel was able to defend itself. Just miraculous stories. I'm going to take this. So what am I saying? A contemporary significance of the fall of Damascus to a non-Bashar, Alawite, Shiite regime may signal, and if, as Arab Muslims, i.e. Sunni Muslims, want to keep on their side of the Hermon, right? This could be a very, very significant step towards not only peace in Eretz Yisrael, Shalom, but Yerushalayim, because Damascus is in direct opposition to Mikdash, and if that opposition to Mikdash is now taken care of or alleviated to whatever extent, we are now clearing a major, major obstacle for the Beis HaMikdash to be rebuilt. And now we see that, put that in context with the calls from the new incoming government of America. Many of the advisors to Trump have actually called for the restoration of the Beis HaMikdash. And I'm referring to Senator Tom Cotton, who spoke about it this week. And also, I think, the embattled nominee for Secretary of Defense, if I'm not mistaken, Peter, whatever his name is, Segeth? I don't know how to pronounce his name. But he's right now really, really embattled because people are attacking him for being a bad guy or an abusive person towards his in his personal relationships with women and so on. But other than that, I mean, if this man survives and is confirmed, that's another strong personal voice in the idea that, yeah, there's no reason in the world that the Beit HaMikdash shouldn't be built, because the primary opposition to the Beit HaMikdash remains Iran and what they call their Palestinian proxies, okay? Shia and Palestinians. If the Shiites and Palestinians have taken a blow, that means a good strength of the claims against Har HaBayis are now dissipating. Now, don't get disturbed by what you hear in the United Nations. The United Nations, of course, is a desperate organization, and they just declared that they too, ironically, right before the fall of Syria, they declared that Israel should surrender the Golan and specifically Har Hermon back to Syria, which they conquered in 67. So you know what? What happened in reality is that Israel now controls all of the territory. When Damascus fell, Israel, I think quite wisely, in its last several days, has retaken the other side, the Syrian side of Mount Hermon. This is a very, very significant development. The land that they lost in the 73 war, in other words, they conquered the whole thing in 67. They had to concede some of that back to Syria in 73, which raised the risk of attack from there. Now they've gone back to the other side of the Syrian side of the Hermon, and they now control it. So someone was saying, Ufaratz the Yam Kedma, they showed a picture of singing that song. This is, again, a positive progress towards a secure Israel. And when there's secure Israel and less opposition, the possibilities of the restoration of Har Bayis go forward. So in other words, the Geula meter has just taken a few points in the right direction, okay? They say, it was well known, that the great Sephardic Kabbalistic master of Moroccan descent, in Nebuch, there was a terrible tragedy in Morocco this week, where four, I believe, Hasidim went to daven by the graves of the Holy Abu Chatzera family in Morocco, where I have personally been and traveled to. And then they had a terrible car accident, and all four of them perished, and they're being brought to burial, as far as I know, today in Eretz Yisrael. And we should dedicate our learning Laliyat Nishmasam. Very, very interesting that there would be this horrible a crash for people coming back from the highest Kibbutz Tzaddikim. Again, these are kaparos, people of the highest ilk and nature. And like I spoke last week about the young man who fell from our neighborhood here in Beit Shemesh. His name is Amir Pinchas Burke. And I wanted to tell you that this past Shabbos, since we last spoke, since we last learned together, the family sat Shiva here in Beit Shemesh, and I was approached by the family who lives down the block from us if they could have a davening on Shabbos morning and Shabbos Mincha with our Sefer Torah here in our base medrash, which you see, our Kanfei Shemesh base medrash here on 104 Hayardain, where we daven Mincha 10 to 2 every Shabbos. They said, can we make a minyan this Shabbos morning? And of course, I consented, and we comforted the family. My wife, God bless her, made a beautiful kiddush in their honor. And at Mincha time, the father, Yishai Burke, was able to get an aliyah and recite a Kel Moli Rachamim for Zamir. And these extraordinary individuals that, like Zamir means to cut, have been shorn from us so violently, so dramatically. It is no doubt in my mind that they serve as karbanos on the benefit of all Klal Yisrael. And we must comfort the families, we must daven, and we must do rededication of Torah mitzvahs in their honor, do more, and also to acknowledge that Hashem, with the Satan protesting every step of the way, keeps moving the Geula meter forward. Do not underestimate the events of this week. I'm going to go back a little bit, all the way to the Chumash and then to Malachim, and trace some of the significance of the city of Damascus and of that whole region, which is known as Syria, which of course is named after the ancient kingdom of Ashur. Okay, Ashur is the Assyrian kingdom that would be the ones who eventually would destroy the 10 tribes, the northern kingdoms, which have been under such attack. So let's go back to the very beginning, to the origins of Syria, the fallen country. The first reference that we see in Chumash to Ashur comes from Bereshis Yud Chav Beis, and it says that Ashur separated himself from the evil company of Nimrod, who came to defy Hashem. And it says as follows, that he was Cush. He was, of course, of African descent from the Bnei Kayin, as we've explained. So he became a Gibor Tzai Lifnei Hashem, but he Reishis Mamlachto Bavel. His main kingdom was Iraq, Erech and Akkad, where the Akkadians come from. Kalna, Eretz Shinar. Shinar is going towards Iraq and Persia. That's where he made his capital. And you know that he threw Avram Avinu into the fiery furnace in Ur-Kasdim, which is all the way in southern Iraq, very close to Iran. So that was his original kingdom. But there were some good people who did not want to rebel against Hashem. And they parted company with Nimrod, even though he was organizing all the nations of the world in rebellion against Hashem. There was one group that left, and that group was Ashur. As the pasuk says, Min ha'aretz hahi, meaning from southern Iraq, the area of Bavel and Akkad and Urkastim. Yotza Ashur. Ashur is an individual person who is a descendant of Shem ben Noach. All right? YIBONEH Nineveh. And he builds the famous city of Nineveh. Now, what do we know about the city of Nineveh? We know that the city of Nineveh was the city that did tshuva when approached by Yonah Hanavi. Why did they do tshuva? So some of the Farshim explain that it was a city that was based on tshuva. In other words, since they removed themselves from Nimrod, who was a kofer be'ikar, and they listened to Shem, listen to this medrash. It actually comes from the Tana Debei Eliyahu Zuta. On this pasuk, he says, Asher haya yodea shmo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He was cognizant of Hashem. He hadn't forgotten about Hashem. Okay, a bracha was recited here. And avalo haya mocha b'bnei dor haflaga. But he didn't oppose Nimrod. He stuck in his quiet opposition. Why? Mipnei shehaya yodea Asher, that for all of his good intentions, something very terrible would descend from him. And that was Sancherev Melech Ashur, who himself, and of course his representatives, were Mecharef and Megadev Klapimal. They cursed God. They turned away from the tradition of Shem and even from the tradition of Ashur and the city of Nineveh, and they became rogue. They went rogue. And this fellow, Sancherev, we know, was defeated at where? In miraculous fashion, right? The Navi speaks about it. And this was part of the great Mapola that they suffered. But previously, they had been more tzaddikim. And eventually, the city of Nineveh would also turn against Israel and become the source for the exile of the 10 tribes. So there was, however, a resistance to evil. They weren't that strong in it as Klal Yisrael was and would be, but they had a listening. They were B'nai Noach. They were B'nai Noach. They were righteous Gentiles. There were some righteous Gentiles there. Right? Righteous Gentiles. And these righteous Gentiles did not formally oppose the God of Israel. And if the God of Israel came and told them to do tshuva, and they listened to the Jewish Navi of Yonah, look what Yonah did. He was with a bunch of Gentiles on a boat, right? And when they threw him overboard, what did they do? They all made nidarim and nedavos. They made pledges to give karbanos in the name of the God of Israel. So they represent those people in the world out there, in the Gentile world, who are B'nai Noach. They're willing to accept Hashem. That's the type of people that we can actually work with. Okay. So way back to the times of Shem and Nimrod, Ashur emerges, and as it says in the pasuk right there, Yotza Ashur VaYIBONEH Nineveh Ves Rechovos Ir Ves Kalach. And then he builds another city called Resen Be Nineveh, and that's it. So that's the history of Ashur. Now, as much as the history of Ashur started out okay, but ended up terribly, similarly, the idea that they were more aligned with Plishtim, who are the eternal, along with Amalek, eternal opponents to Malchus and Eretz Yisrael. So the Romans named that area Syria, Palestina, and we have the Tsaros from them Ad Hayom Hazeh. That this is the Romans' active denial of Jerusalem as a Jewish entity, which of course continues vehemently Ad Hayom Hazeh, all the way back from the times of Vespasian and Titus and Hadrian and so on, particularly Hadrian. So, and of course the church. Sadly, by the way, in my personal opinion, Notre Dame was rededicated today. You know that Notre Dame in Paris was rededicated today. I believe it's in Paris, yeah. And that was the very self-same place where the Talmud was burnt, where the first Crusades were launched, causing devastation, to Torah, to Am Yisrael, complete, utter destruction. It burned. It burned 5 years ago. And now suddenly it's restored. And I just felt that it's not something that the world should rejoice. Certainly not. Even though all the world leaders were there, which lends its curiosity, including President-elect Trump, we're all there. Because it does represent the Catholic world, the ancient Catholic world from the times of Churban Beis HaMikdash and the next generations thereafter, and the early Roman Empire. And those are our mortal opponents. And if it strengthens, that means the opposition to Israel strengthens. So on the one hand, we saw simanim of Damasek/Mikdash going over to hands that are more not looking necessarily to conquer Israel. If you look at the quotes from these rebels, they said something very simple. We see we cannot defeat Israel. How do we see it? Because look what happened to Hezbollah, and look what happened to Hamas, who were convinced that they could destroy Israel. We have learned our lesson, even from Iran. They cannot destroy Israel, right? Therefore, we're just going to concentrate on our area here called Syria. No, halavai. If that is the case, then it's a remarkable, remarkable victory that we have seen, and a big vanquishment of evil in our world, and hatred for the Jewish people. On the other hand, we see the strengthening of the Notre Dame, which is the same idea as the Vatican. They're almost France was the second country to become Catholic in the world, right? Even in the first century of the mamish around the time of the Bar Kokhba rebellion, there were already Catholics there. They're the number 2 after Italy. So that's the core of the Sinas Yisrael. In fact, on its face, there was a picture of a woman whose eyes were blinded and kneeling on the floor, and another figure towering over her. That was the idea that Christianity had overtaken blind Judaism, that did not wish to accept their distortion and their rapacious, twisted conception of being the continuation of Yahadut Chas v'Shalom. Okay. So I think that's just a very, very significant thing. I think we should take, on the one hand, take encouragement that something is happening, and things that fell into place are a sign of encouragement. Really, we have to be greatly thankful to Hashem. We have to notice these miracles. It's not just a random war. These are significant developments. Because Baruch Hu should continue to give strength and victory in the proper way to Israel, to the supporters of Israel, and to the friends of Yerushalayim, Yer Kodesh. And that is really what I want to emphasize today in the first part of our shir. Okay? So this is part 1.
Shir shir chadash